My name is Val Lance Geffro. I'm the Director of Communication Education at the Sanford Institute Center for Compassionate Communication. Our meeting today is run by the fabulous Norma Nava. Beyond what you'll see today, we have recordings of all of the webinars we've done in our series, and they're on our website. And our fall series is shaping up nicely, and we'll announce that in June. So look for an email from us. Today's session is facilitated by five of our affiliate faculty, Dr. Julie Chelaby, Dr. Ami Doshi, Dr. Lisa Eiler, Dr. Michelle Kowalski-McGraw, and Dr. Rachna Subramoni. These outstanding women will be speaking today about techniques to communicate compassionately in this anti-science culture. So we have lots of unpacking to do together. We've arranged this as a Zoom meeting today instead of a webinar because we'd like it to be interactive. So please use the chat feature or raise your hand if you have questions or comments, and we will do our best to respond. So, Julie, I'm going to throw it to you. I think you're the first person to speak. Is that right?
Right. Hi, everyone. Good to see you here. Thanks for joining us. We can advance to the next slide. We'd love to know more about, who you are, where you're coming from, if your role, if you'd like, but most importantly, what brings you here. I think a lot of feelings come up when we talk about this topic of dealing with misinformation and disinformation. So if anything's front of mind that you want to share a brief snippet about challenges you face with misinformation or themes that come up for you a lot. It just helps for us to kind of know where you are. So please feel free to just start populating the chat with things. So STEM classes definitely can come up with some issues with communication. Love to know more about that. Anything else in terms of where people are kind of coming from or where their head's at? If people feel comfortable, you can even unmute to say a word. I think for me, an easy one is vaccines. That's always an easy one that can prompt some misinformation. Any other kind of key topics that are front of mind for folks? Treatment plans from ChatGPT. That's definitely in this era for sure. I think we have to be prepared that folks are going to come in with more than just the list than they once had. So absolutely. How do we engage with that? That's a really fascinating issue. Research funding and the worries about that. Definitely. Absolutely. Ivermectin. I would love to see just even more as it comes up and as we're talking, if there are things that sort of come up for you all that makes you think of right to sort of the misinformation, bleach, drinking bleach, what else do we have? So just get those thoughts flowing. We would love to just see where you all are. And if there's particular things that you are struggling with that you feel like we can try to wrestle with together, absolutely happy to hear more about that. So let the chat be a space for you. So wonderful. Um, Oh, yes. And I'm really glad, Gary, that you bring that up about the vitamin K shots. There was a article that was recently shared by one of our colleagues that was in ProPublica. Maybe if someone could share a link to that article, just this issue with parents declining the vitamin K shot at birth and what some of the downstream effects are around that. That this is a very real issue. Um, Wonderful. And feel free to kind of bounce off of each other's thoughts as we go. But thank you for kind of getting things started. And Happy to pass over to Michelle.
Michelle, before you start, I just wanted to acknowledge the the researchers in the chat. So much of what we talk about today, we're framing in the context of the clinical encounter, but our hope is that the tools that we go through today will be helpful with you in talking, with each other, talking with your graduate students, just as much as they are in helping us talk to patients.
Thank you, Ami. All right, next slide. Great to be with all of you here today. As Val mentioned, we all work together as Sanford Compassionate Communication affiliate faculty. And we're really excited to be able to share with you some of the things we learned during that fellowship that we think might be helpful to all these things that you guys are experiencing. We have had these discussions amongst ourselves as well. We're certainly living in a time when tensions are high. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of it conflicting, some of it, in direct conflict with what we learned as scientists. So it's easy to feel overwhelmed and distressed. In our work, we're also seeing that it can lead to burnout amongst our colleagues, and even on a more extreme level, threats to physical or psychological safety. So there's no easy answers to this. It's a very tough topic, and broad reaching. But we're hoping that by learning some of the things that we learned in our fellowship, you'll have some tools that you can use to step back and to really communicate more effectively when situations like this arise. So our objectives, again, trying to, first of all, to manage our own emotional responses to the current climate, to protect our emotional and physical well-being while we navigate these narratives, remain open to new ideas without compromising values, and draw strength from a supportive community. There's, a lot of us are struggling with this, and there are ways that we can act together. Next slide. So I'm going to touch just very briefly on some background. We have a lot to get to because we're going to have you guys participate in some of these exercises. But we found that certainly this problem is not unique to our workplaces. I want to highlight the picture at the bottom. 9 in 10 physicians, 86%, felt that the incidence of medical misinformation and or disinformation has increased compared to 5 years ago. And I think we're all feeling that. Certainly it's worse in the last couple of years. And the statistics show that more than half of physicians don't know what to do in situations like this, and that it does impact on the ability to deliver quality patient care. Next slide. In more extreme cases, as I mentioned, this can lead to mistreatment. Certainly the problem of mistreatment of healthcare workers is out there, and the statistics back all this up. And this is a problem that's bigger than what we can cover in this webinar today. It requires more definitive interventions than the tools we're going to use. But we hope that at least by knowing these tools, you'll be able to recognize that emotional space, maybe have some agency there, not only for you, but for whoever else you might be in contact with. You can see these statistics. They're not good. A lot of people are considering leaving their job due to violence in healthcare. And so a lot of people have experienced it. So again, we hope that won't happen, and that by learning some of the things we're going to show you in the webinar, you'll decrease the likelihood of any of this occurring. Next slide. So we're going to go through a case scenario. Again, like Dr. Doshi said, this is a clinically based, but certainly it can be any case where you're confronting someone who may not have the same beliefs as you as to what to do next. So with that, I'm going to transfer it over to the people that are going to show you the case scenario, Dr. Doshi and Dr. Rachna.
So we are, I'm the patient, Dr. Subramoni is the physician. We're going to just go off camera, and we really encourage you as you're listening to this scenario to think about what the emotions are that are arising, both for the physician and for the patient, and then where you're seeing the communication build or sort of fall apart.
You're muted.
I just realized that. Sorry. I was speaking with such fervor too. Okay. Um, okay, gosh, I've had a fever since last night. It's gotten all the way up to 103. I feel awful, but I'm really worried, and I know for sure I am not taking Tylenol. I have seen everything online about the risks in pregnancies and all the awful things it can do, and I am going to take my chance with this fever before I put a dose of Tylenol in my mouth.
Okay, so first of all, Tylenol is safe in pregnancy. That's been really well studied. There really aren't better options.
I know that that's what all the doctors say. I have seen that. But, the doctors are all in the pocket of big pharma. So, of course, you're going to recommend Tylenol. I have seen from the influencers and, other people I follow, I've seen all the TikToks about the awful things that
Look,
can be
I
done.
don't I don't want to cut you off here, but like there's a lot of misinformation out there, and a fever of 103 is actually much more dangerous, especially at 8 weeks. This is organogenesis, where high fevers can increase the risk of the baby growing, neural tube defects, and other complications.
Yep, that's what I figured you'd say. I don't feel comfortable taking it. I've done my research, and so many things will go wrong if I can take it, and I refuse to take that risk with my baby.
I understand, but you need to treat the fever. Not treating it is riskier than taking Tylenol. I mean, that's the medical recommendation that we're providing today.
Yes, I know what you all recommend. Do I even have a choice?
All right. Go to the next slide. So before we kind of pull you all on this, I just wanted to check in on this idea of a stress scale. This is a really helpful framework for when you need to kind of take a beat, when you find yourself potentially getting triggered by a situation and really just see where you are. So that green zone is sort of that sweet spot where you are calm, productive, focused, feeling in control. Yellow, you're starting to get a little bit anxious, a little bit irritable, feeling that demand, but you're still sort of hanging in. And then red is full on, you're overwhelmed, you're burned out. This is when you're seeing the, physicians like shouting in the OR. Basically, just you're in severe distress. So, as you think about these sort of three areas of like green, yellow to red, we want to poll you. Go ahead, Norma. On after you hear this, have seen this scenario, where are you feeling? Um, And don't overthink it, just really kind of those initial what's showing up for you, because this is part of the process of really checking in with yourself and knowing how to move forward. Okay. Give another second. Okay, that sounds good. So let's share the results. So, definitely people are feeling a little triggered here, sort of pushing into the red. And that's an important thing to notice is, do people feel any kind of keywords or feelings or thoughts that are coming up for folks that they want to just place in the chat? Would love to see what's coming up for you all as part of this pulse check. This is an important piece of it. Stubbornness, frustrated. I've done my research with influencers. Anyone else kind of like, defensive. I knew you would say that. Yeah, interesting. Oh, that's what the doctor is. It's almost you feel this kind of like, how would you describe their, the vibe with each other? Adversarial. I think you captured it, Danielle, for sure. Not a great place to be moving forward in a in a treatment visit. I'm going to take my chances. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that's being said with these statements too. Because when I knew you would say that, what anybody have thoughts about like what's kind of underneath that or what is being stated? Or with the I'm going to take my chances? Like what's being implied there? No trust, absolutely. So I think listening for when you're hearing those things, that's suggesting that we're missing some piece here and we need to kind of back up and rebuild. Um, absolutely. Okay, I'll pass it over to Lisa.
Okay, next slide, please. So we know where we're at right now. We've taken a temperature check, and we hopefully know that we want to be a little bit more in the green, particularly if we're encountering these kinds of interactions. So I want to mention to you that we have today 5 compassionate communication hacks that we're going to share that will hopefully help you to get more into the green zone in these kinds of interactions, and things that you can start to pepper into your interactions with folks, particularly in cases where there's this kind of anti-science or misinformation or disinformation that's going on. So the first one is letting the patient have the first turn. The second one is finding the story, understanding the who, the what, and the why of both people in the interaction. The third is the technique of yes and. The fourth is reflective inquiry. And the fifth is being able to pause between the reaction that you have and whatever your response is. So we're going to go through each of these in turn. So next slide, please. So let's talk about letting the patient have the first turn. In one study, patients were interrupted by their physician 7 out of 10 times with a median time to interruption of 11 seconds. And yet another study showed that patients only take about 90 seconds to tell their whole story if they're not interrupted. So it actually can be more efficient to let patients get their whole story out initially, rather than interrupting them with whatever questions you think are important, for many reasons. For one reason, you may get more relevant information. You get an understanding of why that patient is there today. In addition, it gives you a chance to learn their communication style. In that 90 seconds, you can get a sense of what's their health literacy, what's their vocabulary like, how will you be able to best respond, what are their emotions like, right? So if they're bringing sort of a combative stance, you'll be able to see that in that 90 seconds. If you interrupt too soon, it may be laying in wait for you later on. Also, just listening gives an increased sense of trust, a sense of feeling of being heard, a sense of maybe you're doing something that nobody else has really done, giving them a chance to air their thoughts on the matter. And it also gives you that enhanced connection. And the connection is what can really be helpful, and particularly when there's a bit of more of an adversarial scenario, to have some connection that you can build on going through there. So I think it's also letting the patient take their full first turn also gives you more time to deal with your own emotions, to pause, to think about how you're going to use some of the other communication hacks that we're going to talk about. So now I'm going to pass it to Michelle to talk about finding the story, the who, what, and why.
All right, thank you. Next slide. So the second hack is a perspective taking, and it's really finding the story in a who, what, why framework. In real life, we don't often have enough emotional awareness to really know what's going on with ourselves, let alone whoever we're dealing with. So this tool is a way we can step back and sort of take that 30,000-foot view as to, what is going on. So next slide. So you're going to have an opportunity to help with this chart here, and it helps to break it down in your mind in a chart when you're encountering a situation like this, whether it's a doctor patient or just two people. But first of all, you need to know, who are they? So for the interest of time, we'll start with what we know. We know that there's a doctor that's very rushed by the way that they interact. Probably have seen at least 10 patients already, and now they have to talk to another one who is not really listening to what they say. Who's the patient? So someone who, again, when you're pregnant, do have a lot of concerns. So they are very concerned. They don't know what to believe. Um, these are the two characters we're dealing with in this case. So in the chat, first the doctor. I'd like you to write, what do you think the doctor's goals are and why do they care? Healthy patient and baby, yep, certainly. Keeping the patient safe, absolutely. They both want to bring the temperature down, keep them both healthy. So yeah, they both have that goal. Why does the doctor care? Yeah, the communication, certainly ensuring the patient has a complete understanding. And the doctor does care. Again, this is dangerous and preventable. Hippocratic oath wants a good health outcome. Again, there's always the issue of outcomes and responsibility for the doctor. And how about the patient? What's the patient's goals and why do they care? Yeah, certainly every pregnant woman doesn't want to hurt their baby. They're scared, right? They want to feel better. Yeah, that's a very, very good point about feeling better. This patient has a fever. They're not at their best. Less is more. And I think the biggest thing is the patient doesn't know what to believe. There's so much information out there. Um, it's hard to sift through it all. So yeah, you can see we really do need to put ourselves in the other person's shoes, take that big view. A lot of times we aren't listening as mindfully as we could. We aren't stepping back. We're just reacting within the moment. Taking the time to listen, as was brought up in the previous exercise, really makes a difference. Just giving that extra little bit of time to let whoever it is you're working with share their point of view. Really listen to what they're not saying as much as to what they are saying. And realize, are there common goals? Again, in our chat, we see there is the common goal of, getting the fever down, making the baby healthy. So really try to find that common ground. If you think about that common ground from the bigger view and not just, your own perspective, sometimes that really helps to move the conversation forward instead of halting it, and really just impacts how you communicate and what the patient hears. So we encourage you as one of the hacks to take this 30,000-foot view perspective, take a perspective and see if that helps. All right. And with that, I will pass it to the next tool, next hack.
Go to the next slide. So now we've taken the 30,000-foot view and you're starting to put yourself in the perspective of the other. And with this next hack, our hope is that we can sort of find and build upon on what you've learned from that 30,000-foot view. So we're going to demonstrate an exercise for you, and I'd like you to just be attentive to the different conversations that are occurring and what you notice about them, how you kind of how engaged you are, and then we'll debrief a little bit to unpack it. So Julie and Michelle, if you wouldn't mind being our guinea pigs. So Julie and Michelle are going to plan a party. And I'm going to ask that you start with a conversation regarding the venue for the party. And Julie, you're going to go first and make a statement about the venue for the party. Michelle, you're going to respond to her statement and start your response with no. Julie, then you're going to respond to Michelle's statement with no, with whatever else you'd like to add, and go back and forth, each of you responding to the other by starting your statement with no. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, go ahead.
Michelle, I have this great idea. Let's do our girls' party at the beach, and it's just going to be so great. We're going to have the waves and the sand on our feet. Don't you think that'd be awesome?
No, I think it's going to be too hot.
B- No, but the wind, the breeze will keep us cool, and the water will also just feel really nice, even if it is hot.
No, where are people going to park?
Well, where are they gonna park? That's never an issue. You just like people can take a Lyft or an Uber or carpool. Like, why not?
Okay, thank you. This time you're going to discuss the food, the menu for the party. And Julie, you will start again. You'll make a statement about the menu. And Michelle, you're going to respond with yes, but, and make a statement. And then Julie, you will respond starting with yes, but, and go back and forth, responding to one another with yes, but.
I think you can't go wrong with a taco bar. Like, that would be awesome to have for food.
Yes, tacos are great, but there's so many pieces that you have to bring to the beach.
Yeah, but I think it's nice to be able to have different, ingredients to meet everybody's different, requirements and dietary things, and everybody likes different things.
Yes, but I think that's a lot of planning that we'll have to do for that.
Yeah, but I think it's worth it because everyone's going to be really happy to be able to choose what they want, and like, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yes, but I think some people just don't want tacos.
Okay. Thank you. Lunchtime, we're all hungry. So we're going to do one more round. This time you'll discuss the music for the party. And Julie, you'll make a statement. Michelle, you will begin your response with a yes and. Then Julie, you will start your response to her with a yes and go back and forth a few times, responding using yes and each time.
I think it'd be really nice if we had some pick me up music to that people could dance to.
Yes, and I think that they would love that. Everybody loves to dance.
Yeah, and if people are maybe not feeling the vibe quite as much, we could always, switch it up to something that's a little bit more like just relax by the beach music, you know?
Yes, and I think that's a great idea. Maybe mix the two types of music.
Yeah, and some people I know can be sensitive about music, so maybe we can have some times where it's just we cut it out, or we can just make sure that we're feeling the vibe of how people are responding.
Yes, and we can ask them for suggestions ahead of the party.
Yeah, that's a good
So
idea because don't cut us off.
yeah,
We're having a good conversation.
this sounds like a great party. For all of you who have joined us, I would love if anybody is willing to unmute and pipe in or throw into the chat. You know, we had a no conversation, we had a yes but conversation, and we had a yes and conversation. Which of those was the most engaging conversation, and why?
I thought the yes and conversation was really engaging. It actually felt it was kind of encouraging because someone was adding on to it. So it seemed like you were more excited about the topic, whereas with the but, it was with the but and the one where we were starting with no. It just didn't seem like it came in with more of like trying to um debate maybe as opposed to just like throwing around ideas.
Yeah, thank you. I see in the chat the yes and was collaborative. The yes and felt more open and positive sounding. And that is one of the beautiful things about yes and is certainly a no conversation can shut things down. We heard that in our discussion with the patient and the physician. There was a lot of no and yes, but going back and forth. All of those, like, I knew you were going to say that. That's all a version of yes, but. I see, Pamela, your comment that the yes, but conversation was the most engaging because it increased creativity. And I think that is the goal of these conversations when we're in these adversarial situations. The beauty of yes and is, you've maybe had the opportunity to think about the who, what, why. You've started to take the other person's perspective. And yes and really allows you to find that sliver of agreement between the two of you and build upon it. So this comes out of the world of improv, and the purpose of yes and in improv is twofold. Number one, you want to make your partner look good, which is often not at front of mind when we're in some of these challenging situations, but does enhance connection and can help us find that sliver agreement that we can kind of move forward through our shared rapport. And then the second is to advance the scene. So yes and is not the yes is not is not saying that you agree with what the patient is saying. So if the physician in our scenario says yes and the yes doesn't mean yeah, you're right, Tylenol is awful in pregnancy. The yes is an acknowledgement that this is the situation we are in, or an acknowledgement that this is your perspective, and you're merely accepting their perspective as their perspective and acknowledging that this is the situation that we're in. The and then allows you to build upon it. And so what that might look like will depend. Sometimes it will be directly building upon it, like we saw in our party planning conversation. Sometimes it's looking at it from a different perspective. Sometimes it's picking it apart a little bit. But the yes and can be really helpful. And again, finding that goal alignment and being able to build upon it. So in just typical clinical encounters, I'm a palliative medicine physician, so I'm often in situations where there's disagreement, for example, between a patient and their medical team. And so in that setting, yes and can look like the patient saying, you know what, or the patient's spouse saying he's a fighter, and our response might be yes, and we're worried about just how severe this illness is and his ability to fight it. Or they might say, we're hoping for him to recover. And yes, and would be yes, we are too. And we need to think about all of the possible outcomes and how we can prepare for those. So this is really an opportunity to, again, advance the scene together, build that connection, acknowledge the reality that each of you are in, and try to take steps forward together. And as people are putting in the chat, yes, but sometimes comes across as a softer no. Certainly in the role play that we did, that was the case. And so just being aware of when are you using yes, but you actually mean no. Next slide.
Next slide, please.
Lisa. Yeah.
Yeah. So to build on this, another technique and hack that we'd like to share with you is the idea of reflective inquiry. And it's pretty simple. It's using reflective statements and then non-judgmental questions to provoke more critical thinking and insight in the other person. So next slide, please. The first part is reflection. And you can do this reflection in many different ways. You could say, so it sounds like you're telling me that you're very concerned about Tylenol. I'm hearing a lot of distrust from the medical system. Or the most direct is just actually echoing their statement using their words. If somebody said, I was worried when I saw those TikToks about Tylenol and pregnancy, you could say, you were worried. And then you would move on to the second part of reflective inquiry. Next slide, please. The second part of reflective inquiry is to ask a question. And the point of this is to confirm your understanding. It also prompts the speaker to maybe explore a little bit more what they're thinking or where it's coming from. You want to be using open-ended questions. You can use how statements or how questions or what questions. Sometimes you want to avoid using the actual question of why because it may put somebody on the defensive. However, you can often get to their why, like why this matters to them, by asking them more about their how and their what. It allows you to be genuinely curious, and you want to have this non-judgmental stance. So here are some examples. Some of my favorites are, what's the hardest part, or what's the opportunity for you here? And then I'll turn it back to Ami for the next slide.
So this is a quote here that's commonly attributed to Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So whether we're thinking about any of the strategies that we've just described, whether you want to say, okay, I'm going to take a moment and figure out the what and the why for my partner in this encounter, or you're trying to resist the impulse to shut down a conversation using no, or you're trying to really deeply listen and respond with reflective inquiry, we have to be able to pause. As we all acknowledge with the stress scale, when we are in these situations, we have a response. It's often a strong emotional response. And using any of the strategies that we have talked about can only occur if we pause to choose our response rather than letting that default reaction be immediately expressed. So the pause can look different at different times. Sometimes it might be just taking some deep breaths. Sometimes it might be counting in your head. You might fold your hands in your lap or close your eyes just for a moment. You might look out the window and look back. But creating that simple, very intentional pause can really give you the opportunity to make a choice about how you're going to respond, which of these other strategies we've talked about you want to use, and then help us maintain that rapport and openness by giving the mental and emotional space to choose the most impactful and connection building response in the moment. Yes, and Julie just said it all much more succinctly than I did in the chat. Next slide. So you've had the opportunity now to think through these different strategies, who, what, why, yes, and reflective inquiry, using the pause, not interrupting. Rachna and I are going to revisit the case. And this time I want you to pay attention again, as we did last time, to the emotions and the communication that's occurring. But what we ask is this time, if you hear us using any of the strategies that we have covered so far, put that in the chat. And so we can see how these are being used as the case unfolds. Oh gosh, I've had a fever since last night. It got up to 103. I feel awful. Um, but I'm super worried because this is my first pregnancy and I've struggled with infertility. And, as awful as I feel, one thing I'm not going to do is take any Tylenol because I have seen everything online about risks in pregnancy. I even spoke to my uncle, who's a doctor, and he yelled at me, but I really don't want to take any risks with this baby.
Yes, that sounds really stressful. Can you tell me more about what you've been hearing and seeing online?
Well, I've seen articles in the newspaper and on Instagram talking about how it can affect development, and the wellness influencers that I follow are talking about all the potential negative outcomes it could have on how my baby grows, how they think, the things that they're able to do and not do. And I really just don't want to do anything that could harm the baby.
Of course, you don't want to harm your baby. You're trying to protect your baby, and it sounds like the information you're seeing is making that decision feel really uncertain.
Exactly. Like, I know what the doctors are going to say. The doctors are in the pocket of big pharma and are going to say that, Tylenol is safe for me to take and I need to do that. But then I am also seeing all this other information from other people, after having done my research, and they have a really different perspective. And, I'm not going to do anything to put my baby at risk. And it sounds like putting my baby at risk would be taking Tylenol.
Yes, I hear that, and you're absolutely right to be thoughtful about what you take in pregnancy. You know, and at the same time, a fever this high especially around 8 weeks, can carry significant risk for the baby.
Wait, the fever is risky for the baby? None of the influencers talked about that.
Yeah, so this is a really important developmental window. And sustained high temperatures, which is what happens when you have this fever, can have increased risk for the baby when it's developing. What we do know is that acetaminophen or Tylenol has been widely studied and is considered safe if used appropriately.
Okay, I mean, this is new information to me. I would really have to think about then whether keeping Tylenol is actually how I keep my baby safe.
Yeah, and that can be hard. So, how are you feeling about that balance between what you just heard me tell you about fevers just now and what you've been seeing online?
Like I said, this is new information. I didn't know that the fever itself could be harmful.
Yes, and that makes sense, especially if that wasn't part of what you were seeing or hearing or reading online. I think, given all of this information, what would you feel is a comfortable next step for you right now?
Well, I don't want to do anything that could hurt my baby, so maybe we could do like just like a low dose of Tylenol and try to see if that helps bring the fever down.
I think that sounds like a really thoughtful plan. Why don't we continue to monitor you closely? Let's give you a low dose of Tylenol, recheck you in an hour, recheck your temperature, and then at that time, kind of see where we're at in terms of how you're feeling and how high your fever is. Does that sound like an okay plan?
Yeah, I can be okay with that.
I think
Next
now that you guys
slide.
have heard this version, I'd love for Lisa to do another pulse check.
I think Julie's going to do that.
Cool.
Yeah, Norma, next slide. Awesome. Let's go ahead and just enable another poll and see how people feel now after this part two. Let's share the results. So a little bit different. Do people have any initial insights on how the temperature changed so much? Calm voice and tone. What about the pacing? What do people think about that? The calm, I mean, I think the calm space in terms of the um, just a little bit of pause was really nice. What else stuck out to people that really kind of brought down the temperature?
Yeah, there was a lot of echoing. People called it out as echoing in the chat, but it was basically back to the yes and. It wasn't saying that the doctor necessarily agreed, but just that validated that the patient was feeling that yes, yes, and you are right to be concerned about what you take during pregnancy. So things like that make a huge difference.
Yeah, waiting for the full story up front. Because what came out in that full story at the beginning that was actually pretty key. Does anyone remember? We can advance to the next slide too. Just we're kind of into the debrief. Did anyone remember what the patient brought up about her fertility? Yes. So I mean that just kind of even knowing, right, that there's like that extra level of care that she's trying to bring to her precious child that she has worked very hard to create, can maybe help the physician show up a little bit with a little bit more care and empathy as well. Did folks notice?
Yeah, I wanted to highlight what was just written in the chat. The convoys mimics the doctor's confidence in the treatment and plan. And so there are some studies out there too that when we get upset, it decreases trust in the in whoever's listening. So that's an important point.
And I also, we want to bring up that obviously this is a script, right, that we wrote. So it utilized all of these hacks as we saw from your chat. So as we look through the chat, we went through almost every single one of this. And in reality, like we often forget to use many of these and techniques, and it can feel frustrating to do all of this just to provide care, right? But as an emergency medicine physician myself, I found incorporating some of these can just help me connect. Yes, and especially when I first learned it, I was like, I don't want to say that because I disagree, right? Like I disagreed with the patient's viewpoint. I was not okay with this patient having a temperature of 103. And to me, when the patient says, I know that I'm definitely not going to take Tylenol, it felt very challenging to start with yes and. But I think that notion of yes is simply to acknowledge that this is the other individual's viewpoint. And then this was an example of how, because it's really easy when we're talking about party planning to say yes and tacos sound great, right? But I think when you truly have a difference of opinion, then this becomes a lot more challenging to really say yes. And I want to hear more. Or that's when we can use some of these reflective inquiries with yes, and tell me more. Yes, I understand how that's making you feel. I want to hear more about that. Tell me more about what you've heard. And that could be a good way to start using that. And I think even just incorporating a few of these, you're not going to remember to do every single one of these in every conversation, but maybe just one or two. Um, it can make you just feel less stressed doing your own pulse check and feeling that maybe you're a little bit more in the green zone because you have that self-compassion that you did the best for your patient. You tried to come to a common ground, and it may not always work, right? In this case, the patient could have said, well, I disagree. Like, I understand you're saying the fever. I'm going to have to look into that more. I don't feel comfortable taking Tylenol. Like they came in with that decision, and no matter what you said, they weren't going to change their mind. But at least maybe this patient might go home and read about it, read about the fever. At least you got to a point where they started to think, hey, I never heard that on the stuff that I've looked at. I didn't know that fever at this stage could be harmful. And maybe they take that Tylenol when they get home or when they've had time to think about the conversation, but simply just to be proud that you had a conversation with a patient that wasn't adversarial because you were able to stay grounded, stay true to what you believed in, not compromise on those beliefs, and use some of these techniques to get there. And I think, in reality, like this often does sound scripted, but by going through some of these, it can help you, especially if you use that pause, that number 5, to then start to remember some of these to before you respond and feel that intense pulse check to instead of responding in a reactive manner, just take a breather and say, who is this patient? What was it really that they are coming here for? And why is this important to them? Why is this so meaningful to them? And to help you find that common ground.
I think falling back on the shared, when you kind of go back to that table of like the why, like both of you wanted the baby to be safe. And I think even if sort of there's that first point that could easily have become adversarial and you could have latched onto that and stayed triggered, you instead, by letting the patient speak and give you a space to kind of regulate and respond, not react, and hear where she's coming from, it made it so much easier for you not to just latch on to that point of contention that could be such a trigger and instead be like, what can we both agree on here? And that is where you find that really helpful yes and that can feel really authentic. That's I feel like the pivot that I noticed. I don't know if other people kind of found that to be the case, but sometimes if you just feel like you are not seeing eye to eye with someone, it's like, is there anything that we can agree on that we can like work as a common thread? And you just did that so beautifully.
Two things occurred to me as you all were talking, and also in response to the chat comment about the calmness in the physician's voice. So we don't have it listed here as a tool, but as Rachna mentioned, like taking your own pulse first is a strategy that's going to be really important in these situations. So, even mentally, okay, where did that land me on that stress scale? Am I red? Am I yellow? Am I green? And acknowledging that can be a step towards bringing that temperature down and also allowing you to do that. The other thing that comes to mind is I was recently at a PEDS meeting where we were discussing the same topic, and people shared this idea of this mental model where our goal is not to say you should trust me because I'm your physician. It's to empower our patients to really kind of think for themselves and think critically and come to their own conclusions. And I think that's what, we scripted so beautifully in the second conversation. But to Rachna's point of even if they walk away from this encounter of, um, without doing the thing that we would like them to do, the hope is we have planted some questions that then they can, ponder over, and think critically about and allow them to, maybe come to a different conclusion next time. And of course, everything that we're doing here does build trust in the physician, which is the hope, but we want to be careful not to just say you should trust me because I'm a doctor.
And I think, yeah, that's like a perfect lead, Ami, to the next slide, which, when we talk to our patients, we're often as physicians, we have this notion of like this power dynamic, right? I'm in charge, I want to give information, but we know it's not really the scientific, like the details or the research or the data that's going to sway or persuade someone who has a difference of opinion. It really is just like this development of trust, values. Does this person care about me? Do they want to know more about where I'm coming from? Are they trying to hear me too? Because in that first encounter, the patient was very much like, I knew you'd say that. Like, and as frustrating as it was to hear, like, can't totally blame them because I don't know if the doctor gave a full chance for the patient to even explain themselves without, you know, a very quick interruption. And do you really use that? Well, this is the data, and this is organogenesis, and this is extremely unsafe for your baby. But to really get to a point where they can come up with some of those conclusions on their own once they develop trust.
I also wanted to just mention that, that there is a sense in which we shouldn't have to do all of this work. Like this is a lot of work. These hacks, constantly taking our own temperature, and maybe things were better when it was just like doctor knows best, right? And I think that having these hacks will help you in many different situations. And we acknowledge that it is too bad that we're in a position right now where we have to use all of these techniques. And you really can make some progress and get to a place that maybe you didn't get to before when patients were just saying, sure, I'll do whatever you want. So I think, acknowledging that this is tough and it's a lot of work and it's not great that we have to spend all this time doing this work and having webinars about this. I still think that there's a lot here that can help you in everyday life, in any kind of time when you're encountering people who are disagreeing with you, that hopefully can help you to regulate the temperature in a way that feels good, that keeps you true to your calling and your sense of meaning in giving care or to the person that you're talking to.
You just yes-anded, Lisa. I feel so affirmed. All right,
All
let's go
right.
to the last slide.
Yeah, I think we're going to put a link in the chat to an evaluation form. If you could give us some feedback about this webinar, that would be great. Yeah, Norma, thank you very much. And then we also have this link here to many of the training resources that include some of the scenarios and the strategies that we shared with you today are available at this website for you to use and take back to your own institutions and your own units to do some of the exercises that we shared with you today.
Thank you so much for this work. I have pounding on the opposite wall of where I'm talking right now, so I hope you're able to hear me. But Thank you so much for delivering these hacks and for the sort of role modeling that you're providing of how to navigate these really complicated conversations. Really wonderful to hear this. And if you're in the audience for the first time, we will contact you with information about our fall series. Thank you for coming. It's been great having you in these webinars throughout the last year. And if you haven't seen other webinars, I hope that you'll go to our website and check them out. Nice to see you, and I hope you have a good day.